Okay guys, so today we're going to make muffins. It's in our same quick bread unit as the biscuits. And as you can see, I have the dry ingredients measured out here and the wet ingredients measured out here, because you're gonna start with your dry ingredients and put them in this big bowl. So let me start with that. We have 2.5 cups of flour, sifted and measured out there. And then, we have 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and then 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and then 3/4 cup of sugar, because if you've ever had a muffin, they are sweet. So we're gonna take those ingredients, and like I did in the biscuits, I like to mix them up with a whisk because I feel like it gets them mixed up really well. Then over here I have the bowl to do the wet ingredients. So for the wet ingredients we have a cup of buttermilk and 1/2 cup of canola oil. And if you can see how that looks, so when you measure your liquid ingredients, you can put them in the same container like this. So the buttermilk was measured out first, 1 cup, and I'm kind of moving it around, but you can see that now it's up to 1.5 cup because that is the oil that was added to it. Then we have, so let's go ahead and pour that in. Looks really weird and kind of fun because of the separation that it has. And then we have 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and then we have 2 eggs. I'm just gonna set this egg over here. Oops, you gotta be careful. Not like Mrs. Abbott was. I didn't get any shells in there, but gotta be careful. Then I'm gonna mix up those eggs a little bit before I put them in the other ingredients. Add those in. Then you're going to whisk those wet ingredients together. All that so it combines good. It just kind of sits on there. So then what you're going to do with your dry ingredients, you're going to create kind of like a well, like a little kind of hole. Like if you think of when you eat mashed potatoes and gravy, you kind of make like a little pit and then you can pour the gravy down in it so it doesn't go all around the edges. You kind of do that with your wet ingredients. And then you're not going to use the whisk. You're going to use a spoon to mix because you don't want to over mix again. So I'm going to finish mixing this, and then Miss Hobbs is going to show us kind of like a little science experiment that we're going to do along with our science experiment of cooking. There's another little extension that we're going to do on this one.
Okay, so now that we have the ingredients mixed together, I'm going to show you some of the science behind baking through adding extra ingredients to some of the muffins. There's a lot of science in baking, and it's really important that you measure ingredients correctly. Otherwise, it can throw off the ingredients and throw off the reactions that are occurring. So we're going to take some muffins and purposefully screw them up so that you can see how all of those different ingredients function. So I'm going to take this, and I have some muffin tins with cupcake liners in them. And then I like to take a little bit of cooking spray and spray into each of them. You don't need much, just enough to keep it from sticking. So if you look, I'm just very quickly spraying each of them. You could probably skip the cooking spray because the paper should pull off pretty easy, but I find it's even easier if you have a little bit of oil at the bottom. So I'm going to take a little bit of this prepared batter and put it into some of the muffin cups. I'm going to take 8 of them to show the experiment, and then the rest of them are going to be your traditional muffins, and we're going to make them blueberry flavored. So I'm just putting a little bit in there. If you notice, I did switch to a metal spoon rather than the wooden spoon. The wooden spoon is great for mixing, but not quite so easy for portioning out. And so I switched over. So now that I have them portioned out, what I'm going to do is add some extra ingredients to each of them so that you can see the science behind them. So I'm going to take, and my first one is just going to be your regular control muffin so that you can see what it should look like traditionally. Traditionally, a good quality muffin should have a coarse texture, be rounded on top, be a light golden brown color because the sugar caramelizes, it causes it to become golden. It should also have no air pockets in the middle because those should escape, and be kind of crumbly. It shouldn't be pointed on top. If it's pointed, then it means it's over mixed. My second one, I'm going to add some extra baking powder. So I have my baking powder here. Take it and just add some extra. I'm kind of going like a little over the top on adding because we want you to be able to see the reactions really well. Then my next one is going to have some extra flour. And then I'm going to add some extra buttermilk. Some extra baking soda. Extra salt. And then my last one is going to be just extra, or my last 2 are going to be extra stirred. One is going to be stirred like an extra 10 times, and then one's going to be stirred like an extra 50 times so that you can see how over mixing changes the consistency. I'm going to get these mixed up, and then I will show you how to finish these properly. Okay, so the science experiment muffins are in the oven, and for those of you that chose the alternate assignment, there will be a sheet for you to make predictions on what you expect them to look like. So you should fill out the prediction sheet now before they come out of the oven, and we'll show you what they look like after they come out. So to finish up the muffins properly, I have my little bit of batter left, and then I'm going to do blueberries. You typically want to use frozen blueberries or like fresh ones. If they're frozen, they should be still frozen. These have thawed a little bit because when we're making the video, it took a little bit of time. So it may dye the batter a little bit. If you use them when they're fully frozen, it won't dye it as much. So if it turns a little green, that's why. So I'm going to add my blueberries, and then we're going to do a process called folding in because we're just very careful about not over mixing this dough. We don't want to continue mixing it and cause it to be a bad consistency now. So to fold in, you're going to do like this motion. It takes what's at the bottom and puts it at the top. So it's a very gentle way of mixing things together. So I'm going to fold those blueberries in. You could do lots of different flavorings if you didn't have blueberries. I've made strawberry muffins before. Be aware, strawberries have a lot more liquid than some of the other fruits. So you could do all kinds of different flavors or different things in your muffins, and it should turn out great. Just be aware if it has extra liquid, you may want to adjust the recipe accordingly. So now that I have these mixed in together, I'm going to add my batter to my prepared muffin tin, And I want to make them all about the same size. And you want to fill them about 2/3 of the way full. So I'm going to go through, fill up my muffin tin until they're all pretty well even. Then they're going to bake for about 15 minutes and I'll show you what they look like. Okay, so I changed the angle of the camera so that you're able to see these a little bit better. But these are the science experiment muffins. So right here, I have my control muffin. And if you look, it's got a little bit of golden, a little bit of bumpiness. It's a very rounded top. This is going to be a high quality muffin. And then if you cut it in half, there shouldn't be a lot of air pockets in the middle, which there's a couple, but really not bad. If there were a lot of air pockets, it would make that pointy top on the top of it. And that's because the air is trying to like sneak its way out of the top. And because there's so much structure, so much gluten, it gets kind of trapped in there and isn't able to escape. And so that makes little air pockets and tunnels inside of the muffin. Next, what we have is our baking powder muffin. And if you look, it is a little bit darker of a color. And you can also see it's kind of a little bit drier and flakier. If you think about what baking powder does, it helps things rise and like puff up. And so since it's doing that and causing it to have less thickness to it. And so it's cooking faster. So if I open it up, you can see it's kind of crumbly and dry. There's a lot of air pockets in it because the baking powder's role is to cause it to get fluffy. And so it's overly doing that. Next, what I have is my too much flour muffin. And if you look, it is a very thick consistency, almost more like a biscuit than a muffin. And it's going to be very dense inside. And if I cut it in half, there are a little bit of air pockets again, but not much. It's just a very dry, and it would be like more crumbly consistency, more like biscuit texture. Then what I have is my too much buttermilk. And my too much buttermilk is kind of unique in that it's more springy. Because the buttermilk is going to make it softer and make it a little bit lighter and more cake-like texture. And if you cut it open, it looks a little bit more cake-like. You can see it's a little bit more springy, not going to crumble nearly as much. It's also a paler color. Then what I have is my baking soda. Baking soda reacts with an acid in order to create things more fluffy. So the baking soda and the buttermilk typically react together and create the gas that makes it rise. But we have too much baking powder, or baking soda, I mean. And with baking soda, because of the like basicness of it, the base of it, it reacts and causes it to turn brown. It's also going to rise too quickly, which can make it turn brown too. And you can see in the inside there's some brown spots too. That's because of all of the extra baking soda. If you tried this, it would be very bitter too. Baking soda, it has like a very bitter taste, kind of like a soapy flavor. And you want to neutralize that baking soda with buttermilk in order to neutralize that flavor so it doesn't have that soapy taste. Then what I have is my too much salt muffin, and salt acts as a gluten inhibitor and a yeast inhibitor. So it's going to make it a little bit softer and it makes it a little bit more solid. We also, since we stirred it, it's creating a little more gluten. So it's a very different texture. It's kind of a little bit more springy like the buttermilk one, but not quite as springy. You'd also be able to taste that it's very salty if you tried it. Remember, once you've added too much salt, there's no going back, there's no saving it, because too much salt is going to definitely affect the flavor. My last ones were my over stirring And if you look, they do have a little bit more of a peak, not quite as much of a peak as like what you'd see from the grocery store muffins. I feel like those are very easy to get peaked when they're like in the boxed form. But there should be extra air pockets. So this one was the stirred 10 extra times. If you look, it's a little bit tougher of a texture because we made more gluten. And if you look, there's lots of little pockets in there. I have one big pocket there, and then there's more pockets around. That's because that air tried to escape and got baked in instead. So that one had some, and let's see, the 50 extra times. Again, it's got those air pockets that are a little hard to see on the camera, but you can see that there's a lot of places that the air got trapped. So definitely want to make sure that you're not over mixing, otherwise it ends up the wrong consistency. So that is our science experiment with muffins. I'll show you what the correct muffins look like as soon as they come out of the oven. Here's our blueberry muffins. As you can see, they turned a little bit blue, and that's because the blueberries were already thawed a little bit. They would have not turned quite as blue if they had been frozen when I mixed them in, but that's what happens sometimes. So there's blueberry muffins.